Deep suffering isn't a mere breaking point. It's a crucible forging. Individuals the mainstream can't readily categorize. Carl Jung, a pioneer in the depths of the human psyche, observed that certain souls having weathered excruciating pain emerge operating on a plane of consciousness, far removed from the ordinary. He termed them the rarely understood, beings whose trials have uniquely sculpted their perception and understanding. If you've journeyed through hell and returned, fundamentally changed, this exploration will illuminate the transformation you've undergone, and why your experience often remains a mystery to others. Between 1913 and 1930, Jung meticulously documented a peculiar phenomenon in his clinical work. Patients who had navigated the treacherous waters of extreme suffering exhibited profound alterations, ones that transcended conventional psychiatric classifications. These weren't simply the expected fallout of trauma dissociation avoidance or hypervigilance. Instead, these individuals had cultivated psychological faculties that set them apart, granting them a distinct advantage in understanding the nuances of human behavior. They possessed the uncanny ability to pierce through social facades, discerning truth from falsehood with ease. Their nervous systems, finely tuned by adversity, registered deception even before their conscious minds could process it. They felt collective anxieties and tensions that eluded most acting as emotional seismographs, detecting subtle tremors in the social landscape. Jung came to a profound realization. He wasn't witnessing damage. He was witnessing a form of accelerated evolution fueled by pain. These patients had undergone what ancient mystery traditions referred to as initiation by ordeal. Their suffering had incinerated the psychological illusions that the vast majority of people carry unexamined throughout their lives. Yet this transformation came at a price. These individuals consistently reported a deeper sense of isolation after their trials than during them. The heightened clarity they'd attained served as a barrier, separating them from normal social interactions more effectively than any physical divide. They described feeling as though they were speaking a different language, perceiving a spectrum of colors invisible to others, and hearing frequencies that fell outside the range of conventional human perception. Jung discovered this pattern recurring with eerie consistency across numerous cases, each marked by different traumas, backgrounds, and personalities. Yet the same telltale signs appeared repeatedly in those who had successfully integrated their suffering rather than succumbing to it. He began to refer to them as the individuated ones, individuals who had achieved what he considered the ultimate aim of human psychological development: wholeness. Sign 1. The death of the persona. You've ceased to care about social masks, not out of rudeness, antisocial tendencies, or a desire to be deliberately contrarian, but simply because you've lost the capacity to feign. The psychological muscle that once enabled you to perform social norms has atrophied beyond repair. When asked how you're doing, you offer either the unvarnished truth or complete silence. Small talk feels akin to psychological torture, as you find yourself unable to engage in superficial interactions. Jung termed this persona death. The flames of suffering have cauterized your ability to perform for the benefit of others. In Jungian psychology, the persona is the mask we wear to meet societal expectations, a necessary tool for social navigation, yet perilous if mistaken for our true self. Most people spend their entire lives identified with their persona, never truly knowing who they are beneath the surface. Your trauma, however, shattered that illusion. You now prioritize authenticity above acceptance, preferring solitude to feigning interest in meaningless conversations. This shift can be unsettling for others who sense that you're no longer playing the game by the agreed-upon rules. Your refusal to participate destabilizes their own fragile performances. This isn't antisocial behavior, it's post-traumatic clarity. You've peered behind the curtain of human pretense, and the memory cannot be erased. The energy required to maintain false versions of yourself has evaporated along with your old life, leaving in its wake a raw, unfiltered presence that makes those comfortable with illusion deeply uneasy. Jung observed that those most identified with their persona often became his harshest critics. His patients, who had undergone persona death, embodied everything these individuals feared: the possibility that their meticulously constructed identities were hollow shells, the terror that beneath their performances lay either emptiness or something beyond their control. You know this experience intimately. When you speak authentically, you're often accused of being negative, intense, or too much. What they truly mean is that your honesty threatens their carefully constructed denial. Your presence serves as a stark reminder of the chasm between who they pretend to be and who they truly are. And most people will choose the comfort of illusion over the discomfort of truth every time. Sign 2, hyper-differentiated perception. You now possess the ability to detect lies instantaneously. Not because you've become paranoid or cynical about human nature, but because suffering has taught you to decipher the subtle language of micro-expressions, voice patterns, and behavioral inconsistencies that others routinely overlook. You perceive people's shadows long before they choose to reveal them. You sense manipulation taking shape before it fully materializes. You feel the discrepancy between what someone says and what they truly mean as a tangible pressure in your chest. Jung documented this phenomenon in his most perceptive patients. They developed what he called a differentiated intuitive function. Their brains process not only obvious social cues, but also unconscious emotional states, repressed content and shadow projections that remained invisible to others. They saw the despair lurking behind forced smiles and sensed the desperation masked by confident displays. Empaths aren't broken. They are alchemists in progress, capable of discerning the hidden layers of human emotion. They felt the collective shadow that groups unconsciously collude to ignore. Modern neuroscience has lent credence to Jung's observations. Dr. Elaine Aron's research on highly sensitive persons suggests that approximately 20% of the population possesses heightened sensory and emotional processing. However, Jung identified something more specific. Within this subset, individuals who had integrated severe trauma developed a level of perception that transcended mere sensitivity, venturing into the realm of prescience regarding human behavior. This gift can be a heavy burden, one that those without it can scarcely comprehend. You can't bear witness to a lie without your entire nervous system registering the act of deception. You perceive collective shadows within family systems, workplaces and social groups as palpable toxic fumes that everyone else has learned to ignore. This ability makes you an invaluable friend, yet a potentially exhausting companion, as you see everything that people painstakingly attempt to conceal from themselves and others. The loneliest aspect isn't the clarity of your vision, but the hostility you encounter when you gently point out what you observe. You're accused of being judgmental when you're simply being observant, labeled as negative. When you're striving for accuracy and blamed for creating problems. When you're merely identifying issues that already exist. Jung deeply understood this dynamic writing, that the bearer of superior perception becomes the repository for all that the group cannot consciously acknowledge about itself. In essence, you become the scapegoat for truths that threaten the collective's comfort. This pattern will repeat within every unconscious system you enter, until you learn to safeguard your gift by sharing it selectively. Sign 3. The solitude of the integrated. You now prefer solitude. Not out of depression, social anxiety, or misanthropy, but because you've discovered that most social interaction drains you as people unconsciously project their unprocessed psychological content onto you. Your inner world has become so rich, so textured, and so endlessly fascinating that external noise feels like pollution invading a pristine wilderness. Jung repeatedly observed this pattern in his practice. Individuals who had integrated their suffering developed internal landscapes that rivaled any external entertainment. They found the conversations within their own minds more stimulating than most social gatherings. They weren't avoiding life. They were safeguarding the psychological sanctuary they had built through pain. This solitude serves multiple functions. First, it provides the space necessary to differentiate between your authentic feelings and the emotional residue you unconsciously absorb from others. When constantly surrounded by people, you lose the ability to discern where you end and they begin. Solitude restores those boundaries. Second, your inner world demands maintenance. The psychological work you've undertaken isn't finished. It's an ongoing process. You need quiet time to process, integrate and metabolize your continuous evolution. Most people use social interaction to avoid their inner worlds. You use solitude to engage with yours. Third, superficial interaction has become actively painful for you. You can't pretend to care about topics that bore you. Feign enthusiasm for activities that feel meaningless, or demonstrate interest in people who only relate superficially. The energetic cost is simply too high. This confounds those who equate alone time with loneliness. They don't grasp that you've transcended the need for constant external validation. Your suffering has taught you that the only reliable companion is your integrated self. Everything else is temporary, conditional, and often disappointing. Jung himself was deeply introverted, requiring extensive solitude to conduct his psychological work. He built a tower in Bollingen where he could retreat from social demands and engage with unconscious content. He understood that true individuation requires withdrawing from collective consciousness to discover what is authentically yours versus what you've absorbed from culture. But here's what most people miss about this solitude. You're not antisocial, you're selectively social. When you encounter someone who has undertaken their own inner work, someone who can engage authentically, someone who doesn't require you to pretend the connection is profound, you're not incapable of relationship. You're incapable of superficial relationship, and there's a vast difference. Sign 4. The loss of ambition for normal things. Traditional markers of success now feel empty money, status, career advancement, social approval. These drivers, for most, seem like elaborate distractions from what truly matters. You've touched something genuine in your suffering, and conventional achievements pale in comparison. Jung identified this as values reorientation through trauma. When you've confronted genuine existential threats, when you've been stripped down to your essence, with everything non-essential incinerated, superficial goals lose their power. You chase meaning instead of money pursue depth, instead of breadth and value connection, over collection. This makes you unemployable in certain environments. You can't feign the importance of the corporate ladder when you've climbed out of psychological hell. You can't fake enthusiasm for promotions when you've discovered that nothing external fills internal voids. You can't participate in office politics when you've witnessed the meaninglessness of most human conflicts. Your suffering has recalibrated your entire value system, and there's no turning back. What once motivated you now leaves you cold. What once impressed you now seems desperate. What once defined success now looks like sophisticated avoidance of everything that truly matters. People interpret this as a lack of ambition, assuming you've given up, and worrying that you're depressed. They don't understand that you've simply developed different priorities, based on direct experience of what does and doesn't matter, when everything falls apart. Jung observed that his individuated patients often struggled financially, because they couldn't compromise their values for a paycheck. They quit jobs that required self-betrayal and walked away from opportunities that others would kill for choosing poverty, with integrity over wealth with self-betrayal. This creates practical problems in a materialistic culture. You still need to survive, but you can't sell yourself in the same way you once did. You can't market yourself as something you're not. And you can't build a career on foundations that contradict who you've become. Some have found ways to monetize your authenticity, building businesses, careers, or creative practices aligned with your transformed values. Others are still grappling with how to survive in a world that rewards performance over presence. Both experiences are valid, both part of the individuated person's journey, through collective structures not designed for individuals like you. Sign 5, the wounded healer capability. Broken people are drawn to you, not occasionally, but constantly. They sense you understand pain without judgment, confiding in you with things they've never told anyone else. Because your presence creates a sense of safety that therapists spend years learning to cultivate. You've become what Jung termed the wounded healer, someone whose scars qualify them to guide others through darkness. This occurs unconsciously. You're not advertising your availability or claiming to possess all the answers. But those who are hurting recognize someone who has descended to the depths and returned. Your eyes bear witness to a survival that speaks directly to their desperation. They trust you because you don't flinch at their shadows. Jung developed this concept from his study of shamanic traditions worldwide. In indigenous cultures, the shaman is often someone who has survived a life-threatening illness or psychological crisis. Their descent into darkness and subsequent return qualifies them to guide others through similar terrain. They know the landscape because they've traversed it themselves. Your suffering has initiated you into this archetypal role whether you desired it or not. You can hold space for others' pain because you've held space for your own. You can tolerate their darkness because you've integrated yours. You can offer hope without resorting to toxic positivity because you know that true healing requires descending into wounds, not bypassing them. However, this gift can be exhausting. Everyone seeks your healing presence, yet few inquire about the cost of holding space for their pain. You attract the wounded because your suffering has left you with the ability to metabolize others' darkness, a superpower that often feels like a curse. The psychological toll is real. You must metabolize not only your own unconscious content, but also whatever you absorb from others. Without strong boundaries and regular practices, to clear absorbed material, you become overwhelmed giving until you're empty, and then wondering why you feel resentful toward people you genuinely care about. Jung emphasized that wounded healers must maintain their own healing practices. You can't pour from an empty cup, nor can you guide others through territories in which you're currently lost. Your wounds qualify you to heal others, but only if you continue to heal yourself. Sign 6: temporal disconnection. You feel ancient like an old soul trapped in a modern chaos. Current culture's obsession with speed distraction and superficiality feels alien to your entire being. You experience time differently now, with fast-paced superficiality registering as mere noise. You need depth, silence, and space to process the profound shifts your suffering has created. Jung documented this temporal disconnection in patients who underwent severe psychological transformation. They reported feeling disconnected from their age group's priorities and unable to relate to the concerns dominating their peers' attention. They felt like time travelers from a slower, deeper era, attempting to communicate with people who speak an incompatible language. This isn't superiority, it's disorientation. Your suffering has aged you psychologically in ways that chronological time cannot measure. You're living at a different frequency than the surrounding culture, and finding others who operate on your wavelength feels nearly impossible. Modern life moves too fast for you. Social media feels like a psychological assault, and news cycles create artificial urgency around matters of little significance. Consumer culture pushes constant acquisition when you've learned that nothing external provides lasting satisfaction, and entertainment is designed for distraction when you crave meaning. You feel out of sync with your own generation. Their milestones don't resonate, and their anxieties seem trivial compared to what you've survived. Their excitement about things that once excited you now appears as children playing with toys they'll soon outgrow. This temporal disconnection creates profound loneliness. You're surrounded by people living in a different time stream, worrying about things you've transcended, chasing things you've abandoned, and avoiding things you've integrated. Conversation feels impossible because you're speaking from fundamentally different stages of development. Jung believed this disconnection was actually a connection to something deeper. You're not disconnected from time itself, but rather connected to a deeper time. Archetypal time, the slow rhythm of transformation that operates beneath cultural trends and generational fads. You're aligned with patterns that repeat across centuries, making contemporary chaos feel temporary and ultimately meaningless. Sign 7: radical non-judgment. You've ceased to judge people's darkness, not because you've become passive permissive or morally relativistic, but because your suffering has forced you to confront every shadow aspect you had been denying in yourself. You've encountered your own capacity for deception, cruelty, selfishness, manipulation, and destruction. Consequently, when you see these qualities in others, you recognize them without moral panic. Jung called this shadow integration. The more you accept your own darkness, the less others' darkness disturbs you. You understand that every human contains every quality. The only difference lies in consciousness. Some people know their shadows, while most project them onto others. This radical non-judgment confuses normal people who interpret your acceptance as approval. They fail to understand that you can clearly see someone's dysfunction without needing to condemn them. You've learned that judgment is often self-protection. We judge in others what we cannot accept in ourselves. And you've integrated enough of yourself that you no longer need that protection. This doesn't mean you tolerate abusive behavior. You maintain boundaries and remove yourself from toxic situations. But you do so without the emotional charge that most people bring to conflict. You can say no clearly while understanding exactly why someone is asking for what they're asking. You can walk away from dysfunction without needing to make the other person wrong. People find this deeply unsettling, wanting you to join them in condemning whomever they're currently judging. When you refuse, they assume you're defending the indefensible, failing to understand that you're simply refusing to participate in unconscious projection dynamics. Jung observed that shadow integration creates what appears to be moral ambiguity, but is actually moral sophistication. You understand that humans are complex good people, do bad things, and bad people have comprehensible motivations. Everyone is fighting battles others know nothing about. This complexity doesn't excuse harmful behavior, but it does create compassion for the suffering that drives it. Sign 8. The crisis of meaning. You question everything constantly, not from nihilism or intellectual arrogance, but from genuine curiosity about why things are the way they are. You can no longer accept surface explanations, needing to understand the deeper patterns, hidden motivations, and unconscious agreements that maintain systems as they are. Jung observed this in his most psychologically developed patients, who couldn't stop asking why. Why do people accept obvious lies? Why do systems resist change even when it would benefit everyone? Why do humans repeat destructive patterns generation after generation? Why does suffering refine some and destroy others? These questions consume them because their suffering had awakened a philosophical hunger that normal life couldn't satisfy. This makes you exhausting to be around for people who prefer comfortable ignorance. They want simple answers. You offer complex questions. They seek reassurance. You offer reality. Your suffering has destroyed your ability to accept easy explanations, and you can't feign otherwise. You see through the narratives that organize social reality, recognizing that most of what people believe is adopted uncritically from culture, family, and media. You understand that consensus reality is merely collective agreement, not objective truth. This awareness is both liberating and isolating. People accuse you of being cynical. When you question accepted truths, call you negative. When you point out systemic problems and claim you're overthinking. When you refuse simplistic explanations. What they truly mean is that your questions threaten their certainty. And most people need certainty more than they need truth. Jung believed this crisis of meaning was actually the beginning of authentic meaning. You can't build genuine understanding on borrowed beliefs. You must question everything until you discover what's actually true for you. This process is uncomfortable for everyone around you, but essential for individuation. Your suffering stripped away inherited meaning systems, and you're now building meaning from direct experience, rather than accepting it secondhand. This is both terrifying and unnecessary. The only way to discover what you actually believe versus what you were taught to believe. Here's what Jung discovered that changes everything. Being rarely understood isn't a curse. It's evidence of advanced psychological evolution. You're not broken because you don't fit in. You're ahead of your time because you've undertaken psychological work that most people avoid throughout their lives. Jung called this individuation through suffering. When trauma forces you to confront everything you've been avoiding, you either break permanently or break through to a level of consciousness that separates you from collective unconscious participation. You chose breakthrough, and that choice transformed you into someone most people can't comprehend. The suffering you endured wasn't random. It was initiation. Every wisdom tradition throughout history has understood that transformation requires descent. The hero's journey always includes a trip to the underworld. Shamanic initiation always involves symbolic death, and mystery religions always required participants to face their deepest fears. You went to the underworld, met your demons, and integrated your shadows. You died to who you were and were reborn as someone new. Now you live among people who are still avoiding the journey you've completed, creating the fundamental isolation you feel. You can't explain this experience to those who haven't had it any more than you can explain color to someone who's never seen it. The language doesn't translate and the concepts don't transfer. You're speaking from beyond a threshold most people will never cross. But here's what Jung discovered that offers hope. You're not alone in this experience. Throughout history, a small percentage of humans have always undergone this transformation, becoming the artists, mystics, healers, and wisdom keepers who carry consciousness forward for the collective. You're part of an ancient lineage of individuals who have been refined by fire. So what do you do with this first stop, apologizing for being different? Your perspective is valuable, precisely because it's rare. The world needs those who can see through collective delusions, and society requires individuals who operate on different frequencies to prevent cultural stagnation. Your refusal to participate in unconscious patterns serves the collective even when the collective attacks you for it. Someone has to maintain consciousness when everyone else agrees to stay asleep. Ask uncomfortable questions when everyone else accepts comfortable lies. And integrate their shadow when everyone else projects theirs. That someone is you. Second, find your tribe. They exist other people who have been through the fire and returned transformed. They're scattered rare and often hidden because they've learned to protect themselves from unconscious people. But they're out there. When you connect with someone who has done the work you've done, the conversation will feel like coming home after lifelong exile. Look for people who speak the language of depth, reference their own darkness without shame, ask real questions instead of performing certainty, and can sit with uncomfortable truths without needing to immediately resolve them. These are your people, and connecting with even one of them will heal years of isolation. Third, use your gifts consciously. Your heightened perception, non-judgment ability to hold space for others' pain, and refusal to accept surface explanations aren't burdens. They're tools for healing collective unconscious patterns. Jung believed that individuals like you serve as bridges between what is and what's becoming. You weren't broken by your suffering. You were forged. The heat that would have destroyed weaker metal refined you into something stronger, clearer, and more valuable. The world desperately needs what you've become, even though it doesn't yet know how to receive it. Your transformation through suffering marks you as part of what Jung called the conscious minority people, who have done psychological work that separates them from collective patterns. You're not alone in your experience. You're just rare, and that rarity is your power, not your punishment. The 8 signs explored today aren't symptoms of damage. They're evidence of evolution. You've achieved what Jung considered the ultimate goal of human development. Becoming an individual in a world of personas integrating your shadow, in a culture that projects it, and finding meaning beyond inherited belief systems. This comes at a cost. The isolation is real. The exhaustion is legitimate, and the feeling of being a stranger in your own culture is accurate. But it also comes with gifts that those who have avoided the journey will never access. You see clearly, love deeply, and live authentically. You've earned psychological freedom that most people can't imagine. Comment below which sign resonated most with you. Write, "I am rarely understood." If this described your experience, let's build a community of people who've walked this path. Subscribe for more insights into Jungian psychology that explain why certain people don't fit the mold. Because you're not meant to fit. You're meant to evolve. You're meant to carry consciousness forward and be exactly what your suffering made you. Somewhere, someone needs precisely what you've become.